The tension inside the university auditorium was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every seat was filled with 2,000 students, phones in hand, ready to capture what they sensed would be an explosive moment. The air buzzed with nervous laughter, hushed whispers, and anticipation, while security guards positioned themselves across the hall, aware this was no ordinary political debate. On stage, the lights blazed down on two women who could not have been more different. Candace Owens, sharp in her black blazer, eyes blazing with aggression, scanning the crowd like a predator, and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, calm in her blue suit, hands folded, exuding serene confidence. The clash began almost immediately. You think you speak for black women? You're nothing but a Democratic plantation puppet. Candace snapped, her voice slicing through the silence and sending the crowd into chaos. Cheers on one side, gasps on the other. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She smiled, a quiet confidence that hinted the storm was only beginning. What followed would break the internet, trend worldwide for 3 days, and prove that the quietest voice in a room can sometimes deliver the biggest blow. Candace, known for her firebrand tactics and conservative empire built on controversy, believed she was about to crush Jasmine in the same way she had silenced countless opponents before. But Jasmine, forged in the fires of grassroots organizing and hardened by the struggles of working-class life, was not the type to be intimidated. The auditorium, promoted as a forum on the future of black leadership in America, quickly revealed itself as something far greater, a battle for the soul of black political identity, with two radically different visions on full display. Candace carried the weight of her national conservative following, her rise from obscurity to best-selling author and right-wing icon, making her a force of media dominance. Jasmine carried the resilience of lived struggle, a lawyer and legislator who had earned every step of her career by knocking on doors, facing down skeptics, and proving wrong those who said she didn't belong. As the moderator introduced them, the atmosphere became electric. This would not be a polite exchange. It was war. The first questions on economic policy passed with controlled tension. Candace pushing entrepreneurship and school choice, Jasmine countering with systemic inequities and government investment. But the civility cracked when the topic shifted to criminal justice reform. The Democratic Party has failed black communities for decades, Candace declared, accusing Jasmine of profiting while her community suffered. Conservative students roared with approval, while progressives booed until Jasmine, calm and commanding, raised her hand to silence them. That's an interesting perspective from someone who's never held elected office, she replied smoothly, cutting with subtle precision. Candace bristled, leaning forward, voice sharp, insisting she didn't need a government paycheck to speak truth to power. The room tensed as Jasmine struck again, calling out Candace for throwing rocks on the sidelines, a remark that lit Candace's fury. Liberal plantation. Candace thundered, sending shockwaves through the crowd, igniting shouting matches between students. Yet Jasmine remained composed, her calm voice carrying like a blade. That's quite a phrase from someone whose career has been built on telling white conservatives exactly what they want to hear about black people. The progressives erupted in applause while Candace's face flushed with rage. She stood, chair scraping, pointing at Jasmine, voice rising to a near scream as she accused her of selling out the community and rubber-stamping democratic failures. The auditorium descended into chaos, students shouting, the moderator pounding his gavel. But Jasmine sat unmoved, hands still folded, her expression one of cold observation, as if studying Candace's fury under a microscope. The contrast was breathtaking. One woman raging, wild, standing, demanding attention, the other still silent, unshaken, in total control. Then Jasmine leaned into her microphone, her quiet words echoing across the hall. "Are you finished?" Adrenaline was still coursing through Candace Owens as she leaned forward, voice trembling with rage but sharpened into a blade. "I'm just getting started," she snapped, her words slicing through the thick air of the auditorium. "You think because you have a title, because you went to law school, because you play the game the way they want you to play it, that makes you legitimate? You're everything that's wrong with black leadership in this country." The personal attacks had gone beyond politics now. This was no longer about policy, but about dismantling the very character of her opponent. Candace's voice rose higher and higher, the shrill edge of fury making some of the audience wince, but her supporters fed on it like fuel. They had come for this unfiltered, unapologetic firebrand who never bowed, never softened, never conceded. They hooped, clapped, and shouted encouragement with each verbal strike, their energy pushing her further into her assault. Yet, even amid the storm, there was something subtle in Jasmine Crockett's demeanor, a faint tightening at the corners of her eyes, a minute adjustment in her posture, signals so slight they would have gone unnoticed by anyone not trained to look for weakness. To Candace, these signs might have suggested she was breaking through. To Jasmine, they were the markers of a tactical miscalculation Candace didn't even realize she just made. I'm tired. Candace pressed on, pacing now, feeding off the frenzy of her cheering base. I'm tired of people like you hiding behind degrees and titles while real black folks suffer. I'm tired of fake respectability politics, the careful words, the cautious speeches, while our communities burn. She spun back to Jasmine, her voice cracking with fury, finger pointed like a dagger. You sit there acting so calm and collected. But what have you actually accomplished? What have you done for our people besides give pretty speeches and cash government checks? The moderator had given up, his voice drowned out by the storm. Security guards inched closer to stage, their eyes wary, anticipating a confrontation that might turn physical. Candace's tirade climbed toward its peak, her crescendo, the moment she was convinced would break Jasmine once and for all. Then she screamed, her voice echoing like thunder across the auditorium's high ceilings. You want to know the truth? You're everything that's wrong with the Democratic Party. You're a puppet, a sellout, a plantation overseer keeping black folks in line for your white liberal masters. For an instant, silence blanketed the hall. The words hung in the air, jagged and electric, before detonating. On one side, conservatives erupted, convinced they had just witnessed a knockout blow. On the other, progressives booed and shouted furiously, their outrage boiling over the racialized plantation imagery. In the middle, undecided students sat frozen, unsure whether they had just heard the most damning attack or the most reckless misstep of the evening. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett sat quietly, her expression calm, her hands still folded. She had taken every blow without flinching, allowed Candace to unleash everything in her arsenal, permitted her to reveal herself fully before a sea of cameras and thousands of witnesses. Now it was Jasmine's turn. Slowly, the auditorium quieted as the crowd realized something was coming. Candace stood trembling with adrenaline, sweat beading her forehead, chest heaving with the effort of her outburst. She believed she had just cemented her dominance, convinced she had delivered the performance of her career. Jasmine finally lifted her gaze, her calm eyes fixing on Candace, before she leaned into her microphone with a soft voice that carried across the entire hall. Ms. Owens, are you finished? The room stilled instantly. Candace gave a dismissive gesture. I'm finished exposing you, if that's what you mean. Jasmine nodded slowly, considering the words. Then, in a move that caught everyone off guard, she smiled. I want to thank you, Candace. Jasmine began, rising to her feet with an unhurried elegance. She walked to the center of the stage, her deliberate calmness a striking counterpoint to Candace's frantic energy. You've just given everyone in this room a perfect demonstration of something I've been trying to explain to young people for years. Her voice was steady, conversational, even warm, yet each word carried the weight of iron. You've shown us the difference between noise and substance, between performance and leadership, between burning bridges and building them. Progressive students began to stir, sensing the counterattack. For the past 10 minutes, you've screamed at me, called me names, questioned my authenticity. And in doing so, you've proved exactly why your approach fails our community every single day. Jasmine's calm composure hardened into steel as she locked eyes with her opponent. You call me a plantation overseer. You said, I'm everything wrong with black leadership. You question what I've accomplished. So let me answer you. She paused, letting the silence settle. In my 2 years in Congress, I've secured $47 million in federal funding for black-owned small businesses in my district. I've written 3 pieces of legislation that became law. Laws that expanded healthcare access for working mothers, increased funding for historically black colleges and universities, and created new pathways for minority entrepreneurs to access capital. Applause erupted from her supporters, but Jasmine raised her hand gently, silencing them. She wasn't finished that I've held 127 town halls in my district, not in grand auditoriums like this, but in community centers, churches, living rooms. I've listened to thousands of my constituents talk about their struggles, their hopes, their fears. I've fought against voter suppression laws. I've worked with Republicans, yes, Republicans, to pass criminal justice reform that reduced recidivism rates by 23% in my district. I've personally helped 1,847 families cut through federal bureaucracy to get the benefits they earned. Each number landed like a hammer strike. Concrete, irrefutable, devastating. But you know what I haven't done, Candace? Jasmine's voice grew sharper, her eyes blazing with controlled fire. I haven't built a career telling white conservatives exactly what they want to hear about black people. I haven't made millions tearing down other black women. And I haven't pretended systemic racism doesn't exist just because it made me a bestseller. The progressive side exploded, their cheers filling the hall. But Jasmine wasn't done. Turning back toward Candace, who now stood frozen in stunned silence, Jasmine said, "You want to talk about authenticity? Let's talk about authenticity." She reached into her blazer pocket, pulled out her phone, and unlocked it. The audience murmured, confused, until she began reading. "This is from your social media account. 3 years ago, I don't experience racism because I don't think like a victim." That same week, a black woman in Georgia was shot in her own home by police. Her name was Breonna Taylor. Remember her? The room fell silent, the weight of the name cutting through the noise like a blade. Jasmine's voice lowered but carried immense force. "You told your followers that if black people just stopped thinking like victims, racism would disappear. Tell that to the families in my district who have been redlined out of home ownership for generations. Tell that to the mothers whose sons are stopped and frisked on their way home from school. Tell that to the workers denied promotions because of the color of their skin." The crowd was riveted now, the shift in momentum undeniable. Jasmine had gone from calm silence to devastating precision, dismantling Candace's image piece by piece, leaving her exposed in front of a sea of witnesses and 100 rolling cameras. Adrenaline surged through Candace Owens as she prowled the stage, her voice sharp and rising with every word, ready to continue her assault. "I'm just getting started," she declared, the words slicing through the air like blades. She sneered at Jasmine Crockett, her tone dripping with contempt. "You think because you have a title, because you went to law school, because you play the game the way they want you to play it, that makes you legitimate? You're everything that's wrong with black leadership in this country." The auditorium rippled with unease as the personal attacks turned vicious, policy long forgotten, replaced with character assassination so raw it made several in the audience wince. Candace's supporters roared their approval, feeding her energy, pushing her to go harder. This was the Candace they'd come to see, the firebrand, the fearless agitator who bowed to no one. She fed off the chaos, pacing now like a preacher in full revival, her words a torrent of rage. "I'm tired of people like you hiding behind degrees and titles while real black folks suffer," she shouted. "I'm tired of respectability politics, of careful words, of playing it safe while our communities burn. You sit there acting so calm and collected, but what have you actually accomplished? What have you done for our people besides give pretty speeches and cash government checks?" The moderator, overwhelmed, had surrendered his gavel, security shifting closer to the stage as the moment swelled towards something dangerous. Candace's voice grew hoarse as she reached her crescendo. "You want to know the truth? You're everything that's wrong with the Democratic Party. You're a puppet, a sellout, a plantation overseer keeping black folks in line for your white liberal masters." The words exploded like lightning across the auditorium. For a heartbeat, silence, shock, disbelief, tension so thick it felt like a hell breath, before the hall erupted into chaos. Conservatives cheered what they thought was a knockout blow. Progressives shouted back in fury, the plantation analogy a live grenade thrown into the center of the crowd. And yet in the storm, Jasmine Crockett sat still, hands folded, composed as ever, watching quietly as Candace unraveled. She had absorbed every blow, allowed her opponent to exhaust herself, and in doing so, had revealed to the room exactly who Candace really was. Slowly, the auditorium quieted, sensing a shift. All eyes turned to Jasmine, waiting. Candace stood panting, sweat shining on her brow, believing she had just delivered performance of her career. Jasmine lifted her gaze, calm and piercing, then spoke so softly the room had to lean in to hear. "Ms. Owens, are you finished?" The simplicity of it cut through the noise like a knife. Candace, still riding adrenaline, gestured dismissively. "I'm finished exposing you, if that's what you mean." Jasmine tilted her head, as if weighing the words, then, smiling faintly, stood with unhurried grace and stepped into the center of the stage. "I want to thank you, Candace," she said evenly. "You've just given everyone here a perfect demonstration of something I've been trying to explain for years." Her presence shifted the atmosphere instantly, measured, commanding, the contrast of Candace's frantic energy undeniable. "You've shown us the difference between noise and substance, between performance and leadership, between burning bridges and building them." The progressive side of the audience stirred, sensing their champion's counterattack had begun. Jasmine's tone remained conversational, almost gentle, but the steel beneath it rang clear. "You spent the last 10 minutes screaming at me, calling me names, questioning my authenticity. But in doing so, you've proven exactly why your approach fails our community every single day." She paused, letting the silence build, then delivered the pivot. "You question what I've accomplished. Let me tell you, what followed was a dismantling so precise it felt surgical. In my 2 years in Congress, I've secured $47 million in federal funding for Black-owned small businesses in my district. I've written 3 pieces of legislation that became law. Laws that expanded healthcare access for working mothers, increased funding for HBCUs, and created new pathways for minority entrepreneurs to access capital. I've held 127 town halls, not in auditoriums like this, but in churches, community centers, and living rooms, listening to thousands of my constituents share their hopes and struggles. I've fought voter suppression in my state legislature. I've worked with Republicans, yes, Republicans, to pass criminal justice reform that reduced recidivism rates by 23%. I've helped 1,847 families navigate federal bureaucracy to get the benefits they earned. Each number landed like a hammer, undeniable and heavy. The applause swelled, but Jasmine lifted her hand, commanding silence. "But you know what I haven't done, Candace? I haven't built a career telling white people what they want to hear about Black folks. I haven't gotten rich by convincing America that systemic racism is imaginary. I haven't made a brand out of tearing down other Black women." The progressive side erupted, but Jasmine wasn't finished. She turned directly to Candace, whose defiance faltered. "You want authenticity? Let's talk authenticity." Pulling out her phone, Jasmine read aloud, "I don't experience racism because I don't think like a victim." Your words, posted 3 years ago. The crowd murmured, tense. Jasmine's voice sharpened. That same week, a Black woman in Georgia was killed by police in her own home. Breonna Taylor. Remember her? Silence fell heavy over the room. You told your followers that if Black people stopped thinking like victims, racism would disappear. Tell that to the families in my district redline out of home ownership for generations. Tell that to the mothers teaching their sons how to survive a police encounter. Candace tried to interject, but Jasmine cut her off cold. "I'm not finished." Authority radiated from her voice, forcing Candace to recoil. "The difference between us is simple. When you see injustice, you blame the victims. When I see injustice, I work to change the system. You profit from telling people their pain is their fault. I fight to dismantle the barriers that cause that pain." Her words rose, ringing with conviction as she turned to the audience. To the young Black women here, don't let anyone convince you that your only choice is to be silent or to scream. You can be strong without being angry. You can be proud without tearing others down. The auditorium leaned forward, hanging on her every word. Jasmine looked back at Candace. "You call me a plantation overseer. That's ironic, because overseers were the ones who told enslaved people their suffering was their own fault, that if they just worked harder, complained less, everything would be fine." Sound familiar? The comparison landed like thunder, the audience gasping. Even Candace's supporters shifted uneasily. Jasmine pressed on, relentless. You've built your career on the same lie. That poverty is a choice. That racism is imaginary. That if we just bootstrap hard enough, everything will be okay. But here's the truth. Real change takes real work. Showing up, building coalitions, fighting every single day for results. That's leadership. She pivoted sharply, her gaze piercing Candace. You call me a puppet, but who funds you, Candace? Who writes your talking points? Who benefits when you convince black people to stop fighting for justice? The questions hung in the air like smoke. Candace opened her mouth. Nothing came. Jasmine pressed on. I'll tell you who benefits. The same people who profit from every status quo that has ever oppressed our community. The same people who would rather see two black women tear each other apart than see us united in tearing down the barriers holding us back. The audience erupted, but Jasmine raised her hand for silence. Her final words fell like judgment. The real tragedy is that you're smart, you're talented, you're passionate. You could have been a force for good. Instead, you've chosen reform for people who see you as their one good black friend. You've built wealth by telling white America that our pain doesn't matter. And when someone like me shows up with receipts and results, all you are left is screaming because you don't have facts. She stepped closer, locking eyes with Candace, her voice almost gentle now. You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see someone afraid. Afraid that if you admit racism exists, you'll lose your audience. Afraid that if you acknowledge the truth, you'll have to do the real work. But most of all, I see someone who's forgotten that our ancestors didn't survive slavery and Jim Crow just so their descendants could get rich by blaming black people for their own suffering. The auditorium exploded. Cheers, applause, whistles, an eruption of energy shaking the hall. Even Candace's supporters looked shaken, many staring at the floor. On stage, Candace stood frozen, visibly rattled, sweat dripping, her earlier confidence shattered. She had come expecting to destroy Jasmine Crockett with raw fire, but instead, she had been dissected with surgical precision, her rage exposed, her arguments dismantled, her legacy questioned before the eyes of 2,000 witnesses and the cameras that would make the moment immortal. Candace Owens came to the stage expecting to dominate, as she usually did, armed with her aggressive style and quick put-downs. But this time, she had met her match. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just another opponent. She was someone who had done her homework, someone who brought receipts, someone who could match passion with substance. For the first time in years, Candace faltered. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Jasmine, almost sympathetic in her calm, nodded and said, "It's okay, Candace. When you're ready to have a real conversation about helping our community, instead of performing for your donors, you know where to find me. I'll be at work." It wasn't a loud mic drop. It was quiet, confident, devastating in its understatement. In that moment, Jasmine showed an entire auditorium and millions online how to dismantle a bad faith attack with grace and precision. What was supposed to be her destruction had instead become her coronation as a new kind of political leader. Strong without being loud, powerful without being cruel, victorious without being vindictive. As the event ended, the auditorium buzzed with electricity, but the real action was only beginning. Phones lit up across the room as students filed out, their conversations intense and animated. Groups huddled around screens, replaying Jasmine's calm dismantling of Candace. Even some who had entered the room as Candace supporters admitted they were shaken. "Did you see her face when Jasmine started listing those numbers?" One whispered. "I thought Candace was going to destroy her," another confessed. But damn, the Congresswoman came with receipts. The contrast and departures told the whole story. Candace hurried offstage, flanked by handlers, avoiding the press. Jasmine lingered, shaking hands, answering student questions, and speaking to reporters with composure. When asked how she prepared for Candace's attacks, Jasmine smiled and replied simply, "I prepared the same way I prepare for everything, by doing my homework and remembering who I work for." Meanwhile, social media was catching fire. Within 20 minutes, hashtag Jasmine Receipts was trending. The most viral clip wasn't even her sharpest attack. It was the 8 quiet seconds where she leaned back, raised an eyebrow and said, "Are you finished?" before beginning her systematic dismantling. That moment alone racked up over 2 million views in a single day, becoming fodder for memes, TikToks, and reaction videos. Conservative Twitter scrambled to spin the confrontation as unfair, claiming the audience was biased or that Candace was ambushed. But the damage was done. Even some conservative commentators admitted grudging respect, with one tweeting, "That's what happens when performance meets preparation." On the progressive side, the mood was euphoric. Alongside hashtag Jasmine receipts, the phrase calm and collected began trending, with Democratic leaders resharing clips and praising Jasmine as leadership in action. What made the moment especially powerful was its reach beyond partisan lines. Viewers who weren't politically engaged were struck by Jasmine's poise. "I didn't know who either of these women were before tonight," read one viral tweet. "Now I know which one I'd want representing me." News outlets scrambled to cover the story, describing it not as a typical shouting match, but as a masterclass in responding to bad faith attacks with substance. Analysts called it a generational changing of the guard in black political leadership. Jasmine, they said, had proven you don't have to choose between being strong and being substantive. The ripple effects came quickly. Jasmine's congressional office reported a 400% increase in volunteer sign-ups within days. Small dollar donations poured in from across the country. More importantly, the specific policies she highlighted, funding for small businesses, HBCU support, and criminal justice reform, suddenly had national attention. 3 days later, polling data stunned political observers. Among black women under 35, Jasmine's favorability jumped 23 points. Among white suburban women, her ratings rose by 18. One focus group participant summed it up. She was strong but not angry, confident but not arrogant. That's what leadership looks like. The confrontation also exposed cracks in the conservative strategy of elevating voices like Candace Owens. For years, Candace had been promoted as a truth teller who told white conservatives what they wanted to hear about race. But when faced with someone who brought not just rhetoric but results, her performance collapsed. Jasmine's response became a template for Democrats nationwide, an example of how to defuse personal attacks with facts, how to remain calm under fire, how to turn offense into offense without losing integrity. The larger shift was undeniable. American politics, long dominated by spectacle and outrage, was beginning to show hunger for something more. Voters, especially younger ones, were tired of the theater. They wanted leaders who could back up their words with action. Candace tried to recover, retreating to sympathetic outlets and posting defensive threads, but the iconic footage of her shouting while Jasmine sat calmly had already defined the narrative. One woman had built her career telling white conservatives that racism was over. The other built hers by actually representing her community. The difference was stark and unforgettable. 3 months later, Jasmine Crockett graced the cover of a major political magazine's Rising Stars issue under the headline, "The Future of American Leadership." In her interview, she reflected with thoughtfulness. What that night showed is that Americans are ready for something different. They're tired of the shouting and performance. They want leaders who show up, do the work, and deliver results. That's not Republican or Democrat. That's just good leadership. When asked if she had any regrets, Jasmine paused before answering. "I regret that we've created a political culture where that kind of confrontation was necessary. But I don't regret standing up for the work we're doing and the people we serve." Someone has to be willing to say the emperor has no clothes. Then, with a smile, she added, "Though next time, I might not be quite so patient waiting for them to finish their tantrum." The confrontation had shifted both women's trajectories in opposite directions. Candace's influence waned. Speaking gigs were quietly canceled, book sales dipped, and even some allies began questioning the substance behind her brand. Jasmine's star, meanwhile, only rose higher. She received invitations to speak at universities, conferences, and town halls across the country. But the deepest impact wasn't in politics. It was in the young people who watched. Across classrooms, dorms, kitchens, and community centers, especially among young black women, Jasmine had given a new model of leadership. They learned that you don't need to scream to be heard, that you don't have to tear others down to lift yourself up, and that strength and substance can coexist. As one student tweeted the morning after, "Jasmine Crockett just showed me what I want to be when I grow up." Not just successful, but successful with integrity. That might have been the most important victory of all. Candace Owens shouting in Jasmine Crockett's Calm Authority had become more than just a viral clip. It was a symbol, a reminder that sometimes the best answer to aggression is grace, and the strongest antidote to performance is substance. More explosive, and you won't want to miss it.